All rise. The mock trial court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is now in session. The Honorable Ziff presiding. You may be seated.
Okay, please be seated.
Let's begin with preliminary matters. Does the Commonwealth have anything to begin?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. At this time, I would like to enter the stipulations into evidence.
May approach.
At this time, I would like to give my co-counsel the opportunity to introduce himself. Good afternoon. My name is Magdalene Paul. Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Lydia Giselle.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Lydia Mallon.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Dr. Scott Woodley.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Amanda. Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Ramsey.
Are there any other pretrial matters from the Commonwealth?
Yes, at this time, I would like to deliver the opening statement.
Let's ask for pretrial matters from the defense, and then we'll get back to that.
All
Thank you.
right.
If the defense may introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at this time, I would like to give my co-counsels a chance to introduce themselves. Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Emily Martin.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Arifin Mohoidi.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Magdalene.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Mona Lisa Guillaume.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Blondell Gagnon.
Are there any other pretrial matters from the defense before opening statements?
No, Your Honor.
You may proceed with your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Again, good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Greed. Greed is defined as an excessive or intensive desire for more than one needs or deserves. Paul Breedy's blind desire for money led to the tragic and untimely death of a sweet and caring elderly woman. On March 20th, 2011, at approximately 7:45 a.m., Mrs. Dana K. Liberson was found dead in her bed at the hands of Mr. Paul Breedy. This heinous act was the result of his intense desire for access to Mrs. Liberson's money. Today, the prosecution will present you with 3 witnesses, and their testimonies will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Paul Breedy had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to commit this crime. Because unfortunately, greed truly did get the best of Mr. Paul Breedy. First, you will hear from Mrs. Liberson's licensed caretaker, Colin Moselle. You will hear about the close relationship between himself and Mrs. Liberson. Over the years of working for her, she became more than just an employer to him. She became more like an aunt. Next, you will hear how paranoid Mrs. Liberson was about her pills. She always believed that one of her family members would use them to kill her in order to get to her money. Paul Breedy in particular was a greedy individual. He almost never came around unless he needed money, and even though he basically lived off the money Mrs. Liberson gave him, he was always coming around to get more. Another thing Lozelle will testify to is the fact that Mrs. Liberson credited him with saving her life. Unfortunately, one day while walking in the woods, she had a heart attack, but his expert training was able to keep her alive long enough for the paramedics to arrive. If that doesn't show how truly and deeply Mr. Lozelle cared about her, I don't know about what. Next, he will tell you about how he left Mrs. Liberson alone with Paul Breedy for a whole weekend from March 4th through the 6th. Unfortunately, Lozelle had to care for a family member, and Paul Breedy jumped at the opportunity to stay alone with Mrs. Liberson. Before leaving, knowing how paranoid Mrs. Liberson was about her pills, he made sure that everything was fine and in order. But upon his arrival, he found that it did not in fact go smoothly. Next, you will hear from Chief Detective and Deputy Chief of Police, Arthur Holloway. He will tell you about what he learned about the changes in Mrs. Liberson's will. He learned that the heirs were standing to get less money, and this angered everyone, Paul Breedy in particular. He even hinted to Mr. Lozelle that he did not think Mrs. Liberson would be around much longer. Next, he will tell you what he discovered upon investigation of Mrs. Liberson's home. He discovered the defendant's fingerprints on her pill box, pill bottle, and bathroom doorknob, all places he had no business touching. Lastly, he will tell you what he found upon the investigation of the defendant's own home. He discovered the book, The Schlenker Chronicles, in a suspicious location. It was found behind his bookcase. This was an obvious attempt to try and hide it, because it told in exact detail how to kill someone with digoxin poisoning. This is not so coincidentally enough the exact same way Mrs. Liberson was found dead. Lastly, you will hear from Dr. Sebastian Lada. He will tell you about the specific pills Mrs. Liberson was taking. She was taking digoxin and potassium supplements. He will tell you about the significance of these pills, specifically the potassium supplements. If one were to take digoxin without proper potassium supplementation, it could of course be fatal. Next, he will tell you about what he found upon an analysis of the substance found in Mrs. Liberson's sink traps. He discovered that it had been potassium residue. It is no coincidence that the very substance known to keep Mrs. Liberson alive would be dumped down a drain, especially if someone had a book that told them exactly how to do this. Last, he will tell you about what he discovered when he did an autopsy on the victim's body. He discovered that her digoxin levels had been extremely high while her potassium levels were extremely low. From this, he concluded that she died from induced atrial fibrillation from 4 times the consumption of digoxin without proper potassium supplementation. These situations are a bit too convenient to have been an accident. He concluded that it must have been premeditated. After you have heard all the evidence, the prosecution urges you to find Paul Brady guilty of murder in the first degree. Today, we would ask that justice be served. Thank you.
Defense?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. It is my pleasure to represent Paul Brady in this case before you today. Paul Brady, a caring man whose life has been ripped apart by the death of his great aunt and the outrageous accusations levied on him by the prosecution. On March 20th, 2011, Danny Keel Iverson, a 90-year-old great aunt to 4 grandnieces and nephews, was found dead on her bed at approximately 7:45. At this time, Ms. Iverson was under the care of her living caretaker, Colin Wiesel. A detailed autopsy recorded Ms. Iverson's height, weight, temperature, as well as many photographs of her body. After a series of tests were conducted, Ms. Iverson's cause of death was found to be atrial fibrillation by an overdose of digoxin. Although several people had full access to Ms. Iverson's house, giving them full opportunity to commit this crime, my client is the only one being charged today, due to an underwhelming investigation by the detective on this case. Today, my client, Paul Brady, is being charged with first-degree murder, which by definition is accusing him of killing his great aunt with deliberate premeditation and malice. The prosecution will attempt to have you believe that this case rests on the hands of Paul Brady, that this case is about greed. The prosecution will attempt to have you believe that Mr. Brady is a cold-hearted and selfish killer who only sought to see his great aunt when in need of financial support. However, the defense will prove otherwise. With no eyewitnesses and sufficient reasonable doubt, the prosecution will not be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which is their burden, that Mr. Brady had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to commit this crime. The defense will present 3 witnesses today: Gladys Kravitz, Erica Bernardo, and Paul Brady. First, you will hear from Gladys Kravitz, a 61-year-old certified herbalist and Ms. Iverson's dear friend and neighbor. Ms. Kravitz will testify on behalf of their close relationship and knowing Ms. Iverson's pre-existing health conditions, as she gave Ms. Iverson her licorice tea with the best intentions. She did so in order to make Ms. Iverson feel better, as she had seen positive effects on her husband when given the same tea. Ms. Kravitz will also testify to seeing many of Ms. Iverson's family members roaming freely around Ms. Iverson's house just 2 weeks before she was found dead. Second, you will hear from Erica Bernardo, a professor at Boston University School of Medicine, where she is the chair of the Department of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics. Today she will offer her expert opinion on pharmacology and experimental therapeutics with a specialization in herbal supplement interactions on prescription medicine to explain how Ms. Iverson's high consumption of licorice tea is what killed her. You will learn that Ms. Iverson began drinking 3 cups of licorice tea provided by her dear friend and neighbor Gladys Kravitz. You will also learn that the night before Ms. Iverson was found dead, she had consumed 8 cups of licorice tea, leaving her a little lightheaded. Ms. Bernardo will testify that Ms. Iverson's high consumption of licorice tea depleted her potassium levels, causing her digoxin potassium levels to become imbalanced, which ultimately caused her normal dosage of digoxin to have killed her. Lastly, you will hear from Paul Brady, Ms. Iverson's dearest grandnephew, who will testify on behalf of his close relationship to his great aunt. Mr. Brady cared so much for his great aunt, visiting her every chance that he got. He cared so much for his great aunt that when asked by Ms. Loisel to watch over his great aunt for the weekend of March 4th through the 6th, he canceled all of his plans, happy he'd be able to spend just a few more days with this loving woman who had supported him all of his life. On the weekend of March 4th through the 6th, Mr. Brady and Ms. Iverson shared conversation about books and movies, being that they had similar interests, and knowing that his great aunt loved the Celtics, they watched the exciting finish of the Celtics vs. Bucks game on TV that night. The prosecution will attempt to have you believe that Mr. Breedy had the motive to commit this crime because he was in a lot of debt. However, nowadays everyone is, leaving students to pay many school loans long after they leave school. You will also learn that Mr. Breedy knew about his great aunt's will that left him a lot of money. However, keep in mind that Miss Laverson supported Mr. Breedy financially willingly while she was alive, giving him no reason to want her dead, no motive of greed. Although Mr. Breedy does not have consistent salary with his job, he does have a full-time job that enables him to support himself. You will also learn that Mr. Breedy was seen moving freely around Miss Laverson's house. But keep in mind that Mr. Breedy was with Miss Laverson for a whole weekend. Miss Laverson was unable to do most things on her own, having her rely on someone to do them for her. And that's exactly what Mr. Breedy did. The prosecution will attempt to have you believe that Miss Laverson's cause of death is based off an unreliable and infrequently performed test whose results aren't even proven to be accurate. Now consider reasonable doubt. Is it just to put a man behind bars considering he was put there on the grounds of an unreliable test whose results aren't even proven to be accurate? Miss Laverson was a 90-year-old woman in poor health with pre-existing heart failure, impaired renal function, heart rhythm disorder, high blood pressure, and mild dementia and cataracts. You will hear from expert witnesses that Miss Laverson could have died due to her old age, her pre-existing health conditions, or even killed herself to end the misery brought on by her pre-existing health conditions. You will also hear from one expert witness that Miss Laverson's high consumption of licorice G depleted her potassium levels, causing her normal dosage of digoxin to have killed her. Today, the defense will present all of the facts. Therefore, we ask Your Honor and ladies and gentlemen of the jury to consider all the evidence and return to the verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
Would the prosecution like to call their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution would like to call upon Ms. L to advance.
Before the witnesses come up, I'd like to swear all of the witnesses in together. Witnesses, please rise. Raise your hand. Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth according to the mock trial rules and affidavits?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Please be seated, and the first witness can come up.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Colin Moselle.
And what is your occupation?
I am an LPN, a licensed practical nurse, which means I take care for the Tyrell Home Health Agency.
What college did you go to?
I attended UMass until my mom got sick.
What is your relevance in this case?
Well, I was Ms. Laverson's LPN, live-in caretaker.
Why did Ms. Liverson need a caretaker?
She had trouble completing tasks around the house, going up and down the stairs and out of the shower. But I learned her biggest trouble was managing the Phillips. And I was to do that, and I did.
How and when did you first meet Ms. Liverson?
Well, we first met after her geriatric care manager contacted my employer, Tyrell Home Health Aid Agency, in 2007.
How old was she when you first met her?
She was 85 years old at the time.
Please describe your relationship with Ms. Liverson.
She preferred to be called DK, actually. Over the years, we got closer. I kind of thought of her as a family, maybe an aunt. And we cared about each other's well-being. We were family.
How did the grandnieces and nephews feel about this?
My impression was they were not too thrilled about that, including Paul Breedy.
How did you feel about him?
My impression was that he was a bit of a shady character, and I say that because he didn't come around too often at that time.
What, if anything, made you feel this way?
Well, when he did come around, it was to get something he wanted. For example, money.
How, if at all, did your relationship change with Mr. DK?
Well, in 2009, my mother passed away. My family and I were devastated, and to make matters worse, the insurance company did not cover the cost of the funeral. Unprompted, unasked, Ms. Laverson generously loaned me the money to pay for the funeral. And even though it was a loan, I knew it was important to pay back in a timely manner. And there was obviously another case where my relationship changed.
What was that?
Well, one day we were walking in the woods outside our house, and she had a heart attack. I made sure that she was, living. Her health was well. more assistance around the house. Her dementia worsened, and my tasks as an LPN increased slightly.
Then what happened?
Well, shortly afterwards, she called a meeting with the family to discuss changes to her will.
What was the change?
In the new will, she was going to split half of her estate between the grandnieces and nephews and me and charities.
What, if anything, happened next?
After this meeting, I was approached by Paul Breedy, and I learned that he did not expect Ms. Blackerson to go on living much longer. I was taken aback by that.
What usually happens when Bree comes to visit his grandma?
Well, they deserve family time, you know, they're family. So I have to make sure that they have alone time, so I run errands.
When was the last time Bree came to visit?
The last time Breedy came to visit was the weekend of March 4th. I had to attend to my sick sister. And in doing so, I made sure that her pills were in an orderly fashion, because I know how important and how important it is to keep the pills in order, because she's very superstitious about that.
What, if anything, happened when you returned that weekend?
Well, I learned from Paul Breedy that if I were to believe him, that everything had gone smoothly, nothing out of the ordinary happened.
Do you think it went smoothly?
Clearly didn't, because
Objection, Your Honor. That's out of the scope of the witness. The witness was not present for that weekend, so he cannot testify to how it actually turned out.
Response?
I'm asking what he thought happened. What if he thought happened? If he thought the weekend went smoothly, based on his last answer.
And what information is he basing his conclusion about the weekend off of? Is there any evidence that he saw or experienced?
Based on his conversation with Breedy.
Based on the conversations. Do you have a response to that?
Just within regards to that question, the question exactly was how did that weekend turn out, and he wasn't present for that weekend, so I don't see how he can testify to that having not been there.
So I'll overrule your objection, but limit the testimony to how it turned out based on what he heard and based on what he knows.
I asked him, what he learned based on the conversation with Breedy.
Well, why don't you just narrow the question that you just asked, prefacing it with the disclaimer about where he got that information from, and then it'll be fine.
Can you explain what you mean?
You asked him how he thought the weekend turned out.
Yes.
If you were to ask him how it turned out based on what he heard on the conversations, because he wasn't there and it's what he's hearing from someone else.
Okay.
So if you modify the question like that, it's admissible.
Right. Based on your conversation with Breedy, do you think it went smoothly?
no. And that is because of the conversation and the fact that DK was found dead 2 weeks later. So it was not smooth, to say the least.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Can you give me a moment?
Certainly.
All attorneys and witnesses should remember to speak up so that the audience can hear and the jury can hear clearly.
May I approach the bench, Your Honor?
Certainly.
I ask that this be identified as Exhibit 1 for identification purposes.
And what is this?
This is the will found at in Ms. Livingston's room upon investigation of her after her death.
And will you be showing it to the witness?
Yes.
And then it's marked for identification.
May I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Could you please identify this document for the court?
This is a will that was shown to me the day of the case.
This was shown to you by Detective Holloway, correct?
That is correct,
And
yeah.
this was shown to you upon his investigation of her room?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, I ask that this document be entered into evidence as Exhibit A.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
And then it's entered into evidence as Exhibit A.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right. Now, Ms. Liberson held a meeting for the changes she was making to the will prior to her death, correct?
That is correct.
Now, at this meeting, she explained all the changes that were to be made previous to her, in regards to her last will, correct?
That is certainly correct, yes.
Now, in this will, her entire estate was to be divided between half of it going to various charities and the other half to be split amongst her grandnieces, nephews, and yourself, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So, in your experience of being included in her wills, any major change to the will you would have been informed of, correct?
In my experience, yes.
Now, had you ever seen this will?
Yes, Your Honor. Scope of witness.
Can you explain your objection a little more?
I don't think my witness will know that answer.
Maybe.
Do you have a response?
I asked him in his experience, so any major change, including him, including himself being included in the will, he had been notified of. So having been in his experience, I believe that's within his scope.
I'm going to overrule the objection because it was asked in his experience and he answered that he did indeed know that.
Re-ask the question. So prior to, all right, strike that. You had never seen this document prior to Detective Holloway showing it to you, correct?
That is correct.
Ms. Liberson had never said anything about it, correct?
No, not to my knowledge.
Now you're aware that in that will you are to receive half of Ms. Liberson's estate, correct?
If we're to be believed.
Could you please read the signature at the bottom of that page, please?
The signature reads Dana K. Laverson.
However, you claim that that didn't seem to be written in Ms. Liberson's handwriting, correct?
That is the appearance that I got. That's the impression I got.
Okay. Now, this will was found on Ms. Liberson's dresser, correct?
That is correct.
Amongst her pills, her pill sorter, things you come in contact with on a regular basis, correct?
Those were items that were on the dresser that day.
Now you come in contact with her pills on a daily basis, correct?
Yes.
You are responsible for going into her pill sorter and giving her medication every day, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Could you also read the date at the top of this page, please?
It reads December 12th, 2010.
2010. So it had been sitting there for approximately 4 months, correct?
If we were to be believed.
So, having supposedly been in existence for 4 months on that dresser, while you're there every day checking on her pills, you would have seen it if it was sitting there, correct?
I might have. I can't tell.
Okay. Now, back to her pills. You are responsible for giving her medication on a daily basis, correct?
That is correct.
That is correct?
Yes.
Now, no one else is supposed to be touching her pills, correct?
You could say so.
It's in your job description to be the one responsible for giving her her medication, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you also allowed Mr. Breedy to spend the weekend in this Silverson, correct?
He jumped up the opportunity when it came up.
So yes,
I wouldn't use the word allowed. No.
you were aware that Mr. Breedy spent the weekend with her.
Oh,
correct?
certainly I was aware, yeah.
Now, prior to his visit, you sorted out all of her medication that she would be taking during that visit, correct?
That is correct, I did.
Sorted out all her pills and all her medication, so Mr. Breedy wouldn't have to, correct?
That was one of the reasons.
So Mr. Breedy wouldn't have to resort any of the medication, correct?
That was the intended reason why I did that.
He had no reason to rearrange any type of order that you had in the medication?
You would think so, yeah.
Okay, so you're aware of Mr. Breedy's career, correct? Like you understand what he does for a living, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevant.
What's the relevance of this?
I'm trying to establish that Mr. Breedy has no medical expertise or experience, and thus shouldn't be in charge of her medication while he isn't present.
Do you have a response to that?
My witness, when Reedy was visiting his great aunt on March 4th, my witness put the pills in an orderly fashion, so that way, strike that. Thank you.
So your objection is withdrawn?
Yes.
You may proceed.
All right. So, may I re-ask the question?
You may.
Okay. You're aware of what Mr. Breedy does for a career, correct? Would you please tell the court what he does for a career?
Stock trader.
He's a stock trader.
Yeah.
So you're aware that Mr. Breedy has no medical experience, correct?
I don't know, but I don't know, but I don't think so.
Now, as a stock trader, you're aware that as a stock trader, it's pretty safe to say he probably learned nothing about medical training, health, anything about health or medicine administration, correct?
I'm not a stock trader. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. Are you aware of any medical training that he has?
I am not aware.
So, having not been aware of any medical training that Mr. Breedy had, you allowed him to spend the weekend with this woman that depends on her medication to survive?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Response?
I'm getting that the witness allowed the defendant to spend the weekend with a woman that depended on her medication to survive, having that the defendant had no medical training whatsoever.
But my witness put the pills in a fashion where Reedy would not get confused.
I'm going to overrule it and let it in.
All right, thank you.
May I re-ask the question, Your Honor?
Please do.
Now, having not been aware of any medical training that Mr. Breedy had, you allowed him to spend the weekend and administer medicine to a woman that depended on her medicine to survive, correct?
It was in a manner that even he should have been able to.
Please answer yes or no, sir.
It required more than yes or no.
Please continue then.
That's it.
Okay. All right. Now, Ms. Liberson acknowledged the greediness of her family, correct?
That is correct.
You even said that nobody in her family really paid much attention to her unless they needed something, correct?
That is correct.
Especially Mr. Breedy, correct?
That is one thing I said, yes.
In fact, Ms. Liberson also acknowledged how terrible CoCap really was, her cousin, Mr. Breedy's cousin, correct?
Yes, she made that clear.
Yet, throughout all this, Ms. Liberson was still very fond of Mr. Breedy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you're familiar with Ms. Gladys Kravitz, correct?
Yes, I've seen her on occasion.
You're aware that she does live next to Ms. Liberson and has lived there for quite some time, correct?
I'm aware of that.
You're also aware that Ms. Liberson and Ms. Kravitz spend a pretty good amount of time with each other, correct?
Yeah, I'm aware that they spend time together.
Now, you're also aware that Ms. Kravitz is very fond of gardening, correct?
Yes, I'm aware.
Also that she's very fond of gardening a specific licorice tea, correct?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Now, Ms. Kravitz would always try to get Ms. Liberson to drink this tea, and you would always have to throw it away, correct?
Yes, that is one method I did.
Now, why would you throw away this tea, Ms. Lozelle?
Because, well, I had read somewhere, I don't know, I don't have any medical expertise, but I had read somewhere that perhaps it had some effect. I don't know exactly basis on this, but I wanted to make sure for DK's case.
So you wanted to make sure that this tea wasn't being ingested because you had an assumption that this tea could be detrimental to her health, correct?
I don't think medical hunches are medical facts. That is not why.
But you threw away this tea because you didn't want any possible side effect to affect Ms. Liberson, correct?
I was being overly safe.
Being overly safe, okay. Now, Ms. Liberson spent a lot of time with Ms. Kravitz outside of your observation, correct?
Well, it's outside my observation. How would I know?
So if Ms. Kravitz was trying to get Ms. Liberson to drink this tea in your presence, isn't it safe to assume that she could have tried to get her to drink this tea while she was alone with her?
Again, it's possible. I wasn't around, so I don't know.
Okay, no further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
And then the witness is excused. Thank you.
Just a quick note to the teams. I'm sort of playing the role of clerk today, assisting the judge. Please keep an eye on the time requirements. You're allowed 5 minutes for your direct and then 7 minutes, 7 minutes for cross and 5 minutes for direct. The other teams have the opportunity to object to if you go over the time. So someone on the team can watch that, okay?
You have a next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution would like to call Oka Holloway to the stand.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the witness?
Oka Holloway.
Thank you.
State your name for the record.
Arthur Holloway.
What's your current occupation?
I am Chief Detective and Chief Deputy of the Oakland Police Department.
What, if any, training have you received as a police officer?
I took advanced training in crime scene investigation and forensic science, and the crime scene investigation included collecting hair samples, blood samples, and other trace samples. I also took classes in psychology.
Where did you become
In the Worcester Police Department,
When did you become a detective?
1998,
How long have you been a detective?
for 14 years now,
When did you start working at the police department?
2 years ago.
If any, how many murder cases have you investigated?
I've investigated over 140 murder cases.
How did you learn about Miss Lewis?
I received a call on March 20th, 2011 at 8:30 a.m. to investigate the unexplained death of Miss Liverson.
Who did you talk to when you got to the crime scene?
Well, at first I spoke to the paramedics and then Mr. Lavelle.
What, if anything, did you learn from Miss Lewis?
I learned that he was Miss Liverson's caregiver and helped her with her daily activities.
What else did you learn from her?
I learned that he was also in charge of loading the daily pill dispenser the first day of every month. And I asked him to show me the pills.
What happened when Mr. Liverson showed you the pills?
I took note of them, and Miss Liverson takes 125 milligram tablets of furosemide as well as potassium supplements and digoxin.
What happened after that?
I went into Miss Liverson's room to investigate anything that may lead me to the cause of her death, and I found a document entitled My Additional Will on her dresser.
What happened after you found the additional will in her dresser?
I dusted her pill box and pill bottles with fingerprints, as well as her doorknobs of her bedroom and bathroom, and sent those to the lab.
What were the results?
They came back to be Paul Reedy's fingerprints.
What happened next?
I went into Miss Liverson's kitchen and bathroom to take samples of her sink traps and sent those to the lab as well.
What happened after you collected the samples?
I sent those to the lab, and they came back to have a substantial amount of potassium in them.
What were the results? What, if anything, what happened after you got the results?
I spoke to Lizelle again.
What, if anything, did you learn from her?
I learned that there had been a recent meeting in regards to Miss Liverson's will.
What, if anything, did you learn from her about the meeting?
I learned that Miss Liverson was cutting half of her will and giving it to charities, and she was including Lizelle in her will as well as her grandnieces and grandnephews.
Did you learn anything else from her?
I also learned that Greedy might be concerned that Miss Liverson might not be around much longer and might have the chance to change her will.
Anything else?
I also learned that Greedy had stayed with Miss Liverson the weekend, stayed alone with Miss Liverson the weekend of the 4th to the 6th.
What did you do after speaking with Lizelle?
I spoke to Gladys Kravitz.
What, if anything, did you learn from her?
I learned that there had been a lot of recent comings and goings of the grandnieces and grandnephews.
Anything else?
I also learned that there had been a few lab conversations between the grandnieces and grandnephews in regards to Miss Liverson's will.
What did you do after speaking with Gladys?
An autopsy was performed of Miss Liverson's body.
And what were the results?
The results came back to be the cause of death was atrial fibrillation, which is caused by overdose in digoxin, which happens to be one of Miss Liverson's prescribed pills.
What happened when you got the lab results?
I went and spoke to Mr. Greedy, the defendant.
What happened when you got to his house?
When I got there, he immediately denied any involvement in Miss Liverson's death.
What happened after that?
I asked to conduct a search of his home, and he was okay with it as long as he could watch me.
What, if anything, did you find as you're searching Mr. Green's house?
Well, as I was searching his house, I didn't find anything suspicious until I got to his bookcase. And behind it, I found a book entitled The Schlenker Chronicles, which clearly explains how to kill someone with an overdose in digoxin. And I thought it was odd that that particular book was behind the bookcase.
What did you do when you found the book?
I questioned Greedy about it, and he became quiet and his hands climbed up.
What did you do after you got it?
I requested an immediate warrant for Greedy's arrest.
As an experienced detective, do you have any other suspects in mind?
Well, at first I suspected Lizelle, Colcap, and Greedy, but further upon my investigation, I learned that Greedy had the means, motives, and opportunity. He stands to lose about $4 million. He knows how to kill Miss Liverson from the book, Schlenker Chronicles. And he was alone. He had the opportunity because he was alone with her through that weekend from the 4th through the 6th.
No problem.
Cross-examination?
Now, Mr. Loisel, Mr. Albright, you spoke to Mr. Loisel, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You know that he's an LPN, correct?
That's correct.
And he was in charge of taking care of the deceased, correct?
That's correct, too.
Now, during this conversation, did Mr. Loisel ever mention any specific exceptions to regarding patient to caregiver relations?
No, not at all.
And you searched the deceased's house, correct?
That's correct.
During your search, you found fingerprints, not only on the doorknobs and the pill box and the meds, but also in the bedroom, both pointing to Mr. Loisel, correct?
Well, yeah, that's normal. I would assume Mr. Loisel's fingerprints would be all over, everywhere, because he helps her with her daily activities.
Can you please stick to yes or no questions? Answers.
I can do my best.
You also, when interrogating Loisel, you learned about the will, correct?
Yes, I did.
You learned that in this will, Mr. Loisel receives money from the first will and also included in the third will that you found when conducting the search.
Yes, that's correct.
You found this additional will, and Mr. Loisel did inform you that the handwriting on the will did not resemble that of the deceased, correct?
Well, that's what Loisel said, but I'm not sure of her credibility. He's not a handwriting expert.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
So, for all you know, he could have been the one who wrote this additional will. Okay.
I'm not sure who wrote the additional will.
But there is a possibility that he could have wrote it. Correct?
Objection, Your Honor. My witness already answered the question, and it's relevant because my witness is not an expert in handwriting.
Sustained.
Furthering your investigation, when talking about the will, but before talking about the will, you asked Mr. Loisel if the deceased had any suicidal tendencies.
Yes,
right?
I did.
And Mr. Loisel did hesitate before answering.
That's correct.
Now, when talking about the will, you also learned about Colcap, didn't you?
I did.
You learned that this was the worst of the grand nieces and nephews of the deceased, correct?
Yes.
Mrs. Lieberson would have disclaimed him if she could, wouldn't she?
That's correct.
Mr. Colcap wasn't too fond of the new will changes and additions to the will, correct?
That's correct.
Now, Mr. Colcap also wasn't fond of Loisel, was he?
No, he was not.
He was, in fact, he felt that he was entitled to more money after hearing of these will changes, was he?
Yes.
Okay. Now, at any point in your investigation, did you interrogate Mr. Colcap?
There was no need to. I had no opportunity to kill Miss Liverson.
I asked you if at any point did you interrogate him. I never asked you if he had an opportunity. Is that a yes or no answer?
No, I did not.
Then you spoke to Kravis, correct?
That's correct.
Now, you have knowledge that this is a neighbor of the deceased who visited quite constantly, correct?
Yes.
And you also have knowledge that they shared a certain liquor's tea, correct?
That's correct.
Now, are you familiar with liquor's tea?
No, not at all.
So you have no knowledge of the effects or what the tea tastes like, correct?
No.
Were you ever curious enough to collect a sample of this tea to maybe bring it into evidence and have it examined or processed?
No.
You never even considered the fact that this tea could have been a possible cause of death of the deceased, correct?
No, I drink tea myself and it makes me feel good, so I never suspected that at all.
Do you drink liquor's tea?
I do not drink liquor, Sheik.
Then you investigated Mr. Green, correct?
That's correct.
You went to his home and you searched his house, correct?
That's correct.
Now, when conducting your search, you found, or so you claim, a book named The Shrinker Chronicles behind his bookshelf, correct?
I did not claim, I actually did find a book entitled The Shrinker Chronicles behind the bookcase.
And now, this bookshelf did contain other books on it, correct?
That's correct.
So there is a possibility that the book that you claim you found could have fell behind the bookshelf, correct?
Yes, that's correct too.
And you are also familiar with this book, correct?
I am.
So you've read it, you know what it's about, correct?
Yep.
You do know that this book is a New York Times bestseller, correct?
Yes, and I do know that New York Times bestseller books are not kept behind the bookcase.
And you do know that New York Times bestseller books are owned by thousands of other people, correct?
Yes.
No further question.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Witness may step down. You would call your next witness?
The prosecution would like to call Sebastian Lada to the stand. Please state your name for the court.
My name is Sebastian Nara.
What schools did you attend?
Well, I attended UMass and also University of California, Fresno.
What training have you received?
I've completed an internship at Massachusetts General Hospital, and I've also completed a residency in anatomy and forensics.
What, if any, certifications do you have?
Well, I'm board certified by the American Board of Pathology in clinical pathology.
What is your current occupation?
I'm a clinical pathology professor for UMass, and I'm also a clinical medical examiner for Worcester.
How long have you had these jobs?
Well, I've had this job since 1990.
What kind of experience do you have in your field of work?
Well, I've completed over 2,000 autopsies.
Your Honor, at this time, I may ask that my witness be entered in as an expert in the field of forensic medicine and pathology.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
The witness shall be so entered. Please continue.
When did you first come into contact with this case?
Well, on March 20th, 2011, after I was notified that the body was ready for removal, I dispatched technicians to transport the body. The body arrived at around 10:30 a.m.
What, if anything, did you do once the body arrived?
Well, once the body arrived, I started my routine. I took measurements, height, weight, and also did a more in-depth autopsy, which was required of me, which included a digoxin test, which is notoriously hard to do, but based on my experience, I believe I did it really well.
What, if anything, happened next?
Well, next, the investigating officer came in, and he gave me his report and the list of the medications the victim was taking.
What were the medications the victim was taking?
Well, she was taking digoxin and potassium supplementation.
What is the significance of these pills?
Well, digoxin is used to treat congestional heart failure and arrhythmias. Over time, the use of digoxin depletes potassium levels, so potassium supplementation is necessary. Without potassium, digoxin can deplete the levels to a deadly level. This usually takes about 2 weeks.
You mentioned earlier you were given a police report. What, if anything, did you learn from this?
Well, from the police report, I learned that the victim, that they collected some samples from the sink from her victim's house. And after analyzing the samples, I discovered that there were potassium residue, which was the same substance the victim needed to stay alive.
What did you learn from the autopsy you performed on the victim's body?
Well, I learned that the victim had high digoxin levels and low potassium levels, which led me to conclude that the cause of death was atrial fibrillation, and also based on the fact that I also, from the investigating officer's report, I noticed that 4 of her pills were missing, and they were not reported by the date she used them. Deducted that she took 4 times the amount of digoxin and the potassium.
What, if anything else, did you learn about the victim?
Well, I learned, based on the report, I learned that she was very good at reporting the pills. So the fact that 4 pills were missing meant that she did not know they were missing.
Could you please tell the court your overall opinion of this case?
Well, based on the fact that she had high digoxin levels and low potassium levels, which were the exact conditions necessary for her to die, I find that hard to believe that that could have been an accident. I believe that someone gave her 4 times the pills and did not give her potassium.
What, if anything else, did you consider as a possible cause of death?
Well, the victim was taking licorice tea, which is rumored to decrease potassium levels, but even licorice tea could not account for high digoxin levels because it only increases potassium, so I thought that was ridiculous.
No further questions, Your Honor?
Cross-examination?
Marshal Latta, you said in your affidavit that you performed over 2,500 autopsies. Is that correct?
Yes?
You also said that in a normal autopsy, you do not check for potassium or digoxin. Is that correct?
No, you're not.
However, you did test for potassium digoxin in this case upon Mr. Holloway's request, didn't you?
Yes, it was asked of me.
And you also said in your affidavit that it's hard to test for potassium digoxin accurately. Is that correct?
It's fairly tricky.
And the measurement of these supplements is what led to your conclusion Ms. Laverson's death. Isn't that correct?
It's one of the factors that led to my conclusion.
So, considering that this test is hard to test for accurately, there is a chance, a possibility, that the results of your test aren't 100% accurate, correct?
There's a chance, but it's highly unlikely.
Okay? And since there is a possibility that the results aren't actually accurate, there's also a possibility that there could have been other factors to Ms. Laverson's death. Isn't that correct? Maybe just even a different cause of death.
Again, it's possible, but it's very unlikely.
Now, you're also aware that potassium digoxin levels increase drastically after death, correct?
They do.
And you're aware that Ms. Laverson's body was found at 7:45 that morning. Isn't that correct?
It was.
And you examined her body at 10:30 that morning, didn't you?
I did.
And after you examined her body, you estimated her time of death to have been 4 to 6 hours before you examined her body. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's what I did.
Which would mean that Ms. Iverson would have died between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock that morning. Isn't that correct?
Yes, she would have.
4 to 6 hours is sufficient time for potassium digoxin levels to increase drastically, isn't it?
It is, but I anticipated that, so I took my measurements from somewhere that the composition doesn't happen, so the levels were regular.
Thank you. And you also said in your affidavit that Ms. Iverson was in poor health with pre-existing heart failure, impaired renal function, heart rhythm disorder, high blood pressure, and mild dementia and cataracts, correct?
Yes, she was sick.
It is possible that she could have died due to her pre-existing health conditions, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a possibility.
And you also said in your affidavit that she was 90 years old, correct?
She was 91. Yeah.
And it is possible that she could have died due to her old age, isn't that correct?
And again, it's possible, but it's very unlikely.
Now, you're aware that Ms. Iverson was drinking licorice tea, correct?
She was.
You're also aware that licorice tea can potentially deplete potassium levels, though it's not medically certain yet, correct?
There's been a rumor.
And you're aware that licorice can increase blood pressure, correct?
It can.
Ms. Iverson had high blood pressure, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
And it is possible to die from high blood pressure, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So it's possible that Ms. Iverson's old age or even her pre-existing health conditions could have caused atrial fibrillation, isn't that correct?
It is a possibility.
So let's assume for a moment that you're right, that Ms. Iverson did die from an overdose of digoxin. You can't say with certainty that Mr. Breedy committed this crime, can you?
No, I cannot.
Now, isn't it also even possible that Ms. Iverson could have taken her own life with the intention of ending the misery brought on by her pre-existing health conditions?
Objection, Your Honor. It's out of the scope of the witness's knowledge, since he is not a psychologist and cannot know the thoughts of the victim.
I'm not asking him to respond as to what he thought she was feeling. I'm just asking if it's possible that that could have happened.
Response?
I just don't think that my witness can testify on the possible motives Mrs. Liverson could have had to take her own life, since he did not, in fact, know her in life. He only examined her body after she was dead.
And you don't actually need to know a person to determine whether or not it's possible that she could have died for that kind of reason, too.
I'm going to sustain your objection in part. Can you limit your question to what she might have done and not why she did it?
Yeah, that was actually my last question. No further questions.
Let's go there. Sustained, thank you.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Can you please remind the court why you dismissed licorice tea as a possible cause of death?
Well, based on the fact that the tea would account for low potassium levels, nitrogen levels, I deducted that it's not possible since she had really high nitrogen levels.
And does this assertion have any medical claims?
Now, licorice tea is said to give high blood pressure, but it's never been proven that it decreases potassium levels.
No further questions, Your Honor.
And is recross permitted in this mock trial jurisdiction? Is there any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Then the witness may step down. Does the prosecution have any further witnesses to call?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the prosecution would like to rest its case.
At this time, if the defense is ready to call their next witness?
The defense would like to call Paul Reed to the stand.
Certainly. I'd also like to take this opportunity to ask everyone to speak up. That goes across the board. Thank you.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Paul Reed.
And where did you attend school?
I attended UMass for a year and a half.
What, if any, other schools were you considering?
I was actually looking into some Ivy League schools like Duke and Stanford, but it wasn't something that I could afford. Even though my great aunt said that she was willing to pay for it, I felt like it was the right thing to do and to take her money.
What is your current occupation?
I trade stock.
And what do you do in your spare time?
I really love to read. I actually read every morning before I start working.
What is your importance to this case?
I'm here today because I'm being accused of killing my aunt, which is crazy. I would never do that.
How is your relationship with your great aunt?
We had a very strong relationship. I really loved her and she really loved me. I spent as much time as I could with her, and I've always been for her, just like she has always been there for me.
And how is your family's relationship with your great aunt?
I wouldn't say it's as strong as my relationship with her. They didn't really care for her. Nobody really visited her other than I did, other than me. For example, my cousin Kokap, it did not really seem to accept the changes that she made to her will. He never really agreed with anything she did.
What, if anything, did she ever mention about her wealth?
She mentioned that she was gonna change it and give half of her money to charity, and then the other half will be split between not only the four nieces and nephews, but also Loisel as well.
How did you feel about these changes to the will?
To be honest, it didn't affect me at all. It is her money. She could do with it as she pleased. And I felt like Loisel did deserve some money. She has been there for my aunt for the past couple of years.
And how did your family react to the change in the will?
I think I was the only one that was okay with it. Kokap was furious. He felt like since Loisel was not part of the family, he should not deserve any of the money.
Prior to her death, when was the last time you saw your aunt?
I actually spent the weekend with her on March 4th. Loisel had some family problems to take care of, so I decided to take care of her.
And what, if anything, happened during this weekend?
It was a pretty good weekend. We watched the Celtics and Bucks game. I basically did for her what Loisel would do for her on a normal basis. Gave her medication and basically just took care of her. We just kind of just spent time.
How did you feel about assuming the position of Loisel for the weekend?
I thought it was great. I mean, I love spending time with my great aunt. We're very close. She has always been there for me, so why not?
And how do you feel about this whole situation?
I think it's crazy that I'm being blamed for this. To be honest, I love my aunt more than I love myself, and the reason I say that is because she did for me what I could not do for myself, and that was put a roof over my head.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Miss Levison bought the house you live in, correct?
Yes, she did.
And you might have lost your house if not for Miss Levison's generosity in her will, correct?
That is correct.
You're a 30-year-old man, am I right?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Your Honor, I'm trying to prove that Mr. Greedy here was dependent on Miss Levison.
Response?
No response.
It's cross-examination, so I'll overrule it and give her a little leeway.
You're a 30-year-old man, correct?
That is correct.
And you've never had a full-time job, correct?
I wouldn't say that. I work very hard.
Can you answer with a yes or no? You've never had a full-time job, correct?
Yes, I do.
You are aware Miss Levison's health was deteriorating, correct?
Yes.
And she was taking a lot of pills which kept her healthy.
Yeah,
correct?
she took a lot of pills.
Let's talk about her will. On February 21st, 2011, Miss Levison asked you to come over her house to discuss some important business, correct?
Yeah, she wanted to talk about the will.
And she made it known that she was including Loisel and the Chandlers in her will, correct?
That is correct.
You are aware if Miss Levison stayed alive till the new will was published, you would lose a lot of money, correct?
Yes.
You didn't want her to change it, did you?
Like I said before, it didn't really affect me what she did with her money.
You decided to visit her more regularly after this meeting, correct?
I've always tried to visit her regularly.
But you decided to visit her more regularly after this meeting, correct?
Well, yeah, she fainted in the woods, so I felt like I need to visit her more.
Yeah, and a motion to strike everything up to yes as in response to my question. The following Friday, March 4th, you went over to see Miss Levison,
Excuse me,
correct?
do you have any objection to that motion?
No, it's fine.
Okay, then the testimony is stricken after yes.
The following Friday, March 4th, you went over to visit Miss Levison, correct?
That is correct.
And you jumped that opportunity to stay for the weekend with Miss Levison solo herself or attend to a sick relative, correct?
Yeah, why wouldn't I love my own too?
After watching the Celtics Bucks game with Miss Levison, she asked you to get her pills, am I right?
Yes, because she could not do it herself.
The pill bottles and pill boxes were neatly stored on the dresser, am I right?
I guess.
Yes or no?
Yeah.
Even though Loisel had carefully stored them in a way which should have been easy for you to identify, you fumbled through them, correct?
Well, I'm not used to pills, so yes, I did.
Mr. Breedy, you're trying to tell the court that you still fumbled through the bottles even though they were neatly stored and all you had to do was go to the right place and hand it to her?
I wouldn't say they were neatly stored, so that's why I had a hard time. She does take a lot of pills.
You had access to Miss Levison's room on a regular basis, correct?
Yes, because that's where her pills were.
Is it not true that there were 5 other bathrooms in the house but you chose to use Miss Levison's personal one?
I did not.
Objection, Your Honor. What is the relevance to what bathroom he used in her house?
Your Honor, there was evidence found in the bathroom, meaning he used it regularly, showing he could have been the possible person who killed Miss Levison.
Response? What is the relevance if there was more than one bathroom in the house?
It shows that he used the bathroom regularly, so he had to know what you mean.
I don't understand why that's relevant or important.
So is it are you proffering that it goes to his opportunity to commit the crime? Then I'll overrule the objection. You can dive into that and move direct if you want.
You enjoy reading, don't you?
Yes, I do.
You're a member of several book clubs, am I right?
Yes, I love to read.
And in book clubs, you often read New York Times bestsellers, am I right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Now let's talk about what happened after Miss Levison's death. Did Detective Holloway not search your house?
Yes, he did.
In fact, he found a copy of the Shankar Chronicles behind your bookshelf, correct?
That is not correct. He actually found a book on my bookshelf with 500 other books that I own.
Is it not true that you climbed up once he asked you if you were familiar with the story?
I wouldn't say I clammed up, no.
You got quiet because it was obvious Detective Holloway was accusing you of killing Miss Levison.
Yes, that is correct.
The Shankar Chronicles explains exactly how to kill someone using diagnosing, am I right?
I wouldn't know that. I did not read the book.
Detective Holloway told you about how your aunt died, am I right?
That is correct.
And that was by overdose of diagnosing, correct?
That is correct.
And you are aware that's the exact way the person in Shankar Chronicles died, correct?
Like I've stated before, I did not read this book, so I would not know.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Why did you not answer Officer Holloway's questions when he asked you?
Well, the way he was asking his questions made it seem like he was accusing me of killing my aunt. And at that point, I realized if I said anything, he would use it against me.
And after your great aunt fainted in the woods, why did you feel necessary to visit her more?
Because I felt like it was serious and that she might not have much long to live, so I wanted to spend as much time with her as I could.
And again, I ask, why did you use Miss Levison's bathroom?
To be honest with you, she has the bathroom in her room is the nicest one in the house.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any recross?
Yes, Your Honor. You found out when Detective Holloway asked you about the book because he was accusing you of killing Miss Levison and you had a guilty conscience, correct?
Like I said before, I did not pull him up.
You got quiet.
Yes, I did.
And the reason is because he was accusing you and you had a guilty conscience, correct?
I did not have a guilty conscience, no.
No further questions.
The witness may step down. Would the defense like to call their next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to call Gladys Kravitz to the stand, please. Name again?
Please do.
Can you state your name for the record?
I'm Gladys Kravitz.
How old are you?
I'm 62 years old.
Where do you live?
I live at 33 Graniteville Avenue, Oakham.
Who are your immediate neighbors?
I lived directly next to Ms. Liverson.
Can you describe your relationship with her?
Sure. Well, naturally, living next to her for almost 40 years, we became really close. We talked daily, and we shared a really strong bond over the gardens that we kept in our backyards.
You mentioned you have a garden. What do you garden?
I grow tea. I grew this interest in tea when I first moved to my house in Oakham, and then later I started taking these courses on herbology, and it's just been a hobby of mine ever since.
What, if any, tea did you share with Ms. Liverson?
Often I shared with her my licorice tea. She was sick and old, and after the first time I'd given it to her, she said that it made her feel better, so I continued to give her the licorice tea. I even started keeping track of it as an experiment.
Why did you want to keep track of Ms. Liverson's tea intake?
I was interested in seeing how much tea and at what times of the day it would make her feel better.
You indicated in your affidavit Lozelle disagreed with your herbal remedies. Why?
I'm not sure. Lozelle had always had this aversion to my natural medicines, and always tried to keep the tea that I would give to Miss Liverson away from her. I'm not too sure why. We never really got along. I'm not a huge fan of her caretaking.
What, if anything, did you specifically find wrong with Lozelle's caretaking?
Lozelle seemed a little shady. When Miss Liverson's family would come by to visit her, it seemed like Lozelle would take that time to goof off and go run errands, but just kind of take time for herself.
In your affidavit, you indicate that you don't exactly trust Ms. Liverson's grandnieces and nephews' intention regarding the will. Who specifically did you mention had a strong distaste for the new will?
Well, from my own personal observations, it seems like COCAP was most affected and upset about the change in the will.
How do you know this?
Well, one day after a family meeting that was held at Ms. Liverson's house, I overheard a conversation between COCAP and Ms.
Objection. That's hearsay. She's bringing her out of court statement report.
Response?
Wait, what did she say?
Witness, can you repeat the statement you just made?
Sure.
I had overheard a conversation after the meeting held at Ms. Liverson's house between her family members. I believe the objection was to hearsay about that conversation. Do you have a response to the hearsay objection?
She's not saying anything that she heard outside of the court. She's just saying she overheard a conversation. She didn't say exactly what she heard from the conversation.
Do you have a response?
The witness's testimony is calling for her to repeat an out-of-court statement.
So far, I haven't heard any specific statements elicited, so I'm going to overrule the objection. But if you do hear a specific statement, you can feel free to renew your objection.
Thank you. Back to you, T. Who else, if anyone, has consumed your licorice tea?
I used to give my licorice tea to my husband.
How did the tea affect your husband?
Well, he had bursitis, and much like DK, he said that it made him feel better after, so I just continued to give him the licorice tea.
So is his bursitis entirely healed?
Well, no, actually, my husband had passed away a few years ago.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Kravitz, is it safe to say that you and Ms. Liverson are close friends?
Absolutely.
Is it also safe to say that the two of you love to spend time together?
Yes.
And while the two of you are bonding, you exchange stories about your families, right? Is that right?
That's right.
Ms. Liverson would tell you stories about her grandnieces and nephews, including the defendant. Is that correct? And throughout the time you were living next door to Miss Liberson, you obviously had occasional encounters with Breedy, is that correct?
That is correct.
And from what you could tell, you didn't think the defendant had a genuine interest in Miss Liberson, is that right?
That's true.
Back to Miss Liberson, since the two of you were close, you had to know about her existing health complications, is that correct?
Yes.
And you were also aware that she was a very wealthy woman, right? Miss Liberson made it known to you that she felt as though her grandnieces and nephews were only after her money, is that correct?
Yeah, she had mentioned that.
And Miss Liberson also mentioned to you that at one time she was even considering cutting her relatives out of the will completely, is that right?
Yeah, she had mentioned that.
And back to the defendant, would it be safe to say that his visits were inconsistent?
Yeah, they were pretty inconsistent.
And you even thought that he was a little odd, is that right?
Yes.
And is it also true that you would occasionally see him in parts of the house that he had no business being in?
That is correct.
You saw the defendant in Sliberson's personal bathroom, even though there were 5 other bathrooms in the house, is that correct?
That's correct.
And now some questions about your tea. You've taken several courses about herbs and medical plants, is that correct?
Yes.
And so that means you would have obviously known beforehand if the tea you were giving Miss Liberson was going to harm her, is that right?
Of course.
And so as a trained herbalist, you knew this tea was safe for Miss Liberson's drink, is that right?
Absolutely safe.
So you do not believe that your tea had anything to do with the death of Dana K. Liberson?
No.
And just to make things clear, you never learned from Miss Liberson that you'd be receiving anything from her after her death, is that correct?
Right.
No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
The witness may step down. Defense, do you have another witness to call?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Dr. Erica Benorto to the stand. May I proceed?
Please do.
Could you please state your name for the court?
My name is Erica Benorto.
And what is your role in this case?
I'm here to explain the possible alternate theory to Mrs. Dana K. Liberson's death, as well as her increased digoxin and lowered potassium levels.
And what have you done to prepare for this, your role?
I have refreshed myself on all relevant medical literature on licorice and its effects. I have also spent 8 hours reviewing the autopsy report made by Dr. Lada, and I have also read the affidavits of both Mrs. Kravitz and Mr. Lizell.
Now, doctor, what is your current occupation?
I am currently the chair of the Department of Experimental Therapeutics and Pharmaceuticals at Boston University School of Medicine.
Could you please state your other various credentials?
I received my BA in chemistry from Harvard University in 1988. I received my PhD in biochemistry in 1994. From 1994 to 1999, I was an assistant professor at Harvard University School of Medicine. From 1999 to 2004, I was a professor at BU School of Medicine, and now I am currently the chair of the Department of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics. My areas of expertise include pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics, dietary antioxidants, and chronic disease.
Your Honor, at this time, I ask that Dr. Benorto be entered in as an expert in herbal supplement interactions with prescription medicine.
Any objection? She's recognized as an expert.
What do you know about Ms. Dana K. Liberson's death?
Well, according to Dr. Lada's autopsy report, Mrs. Liberson died from atrial fibrillation caused by a digoxin overdose. While I do agree that she did die from atrial fibrillation, I do not believe that the cause was digoxin overdose.
And why do you not think there was an overdose of digoxin?
Well, the way both chemicals are analyzed is very inaccurate, and following death, it changes greatly.
If you do not believe there was an overdose of digoxin, what theories do you have on the cause of Mrs. Liberson's atrial fibrillation?
Well, I believe Mrs. Liberson's atrial fibrillation was caused due to her consumption of licorice tea, which contains a chemical that lowers the kidney's retention of potassium.
Your Honor, may I approach opposing counsel?
You may.
Your Honor, may I approach the bench?
You may.
Your Honor, I ask that this document be marked as Defense Exhibit B for identification.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It is the tea journal kept by Mrs. Liberson.
And how are you sure this is the exact same tea journal?
Well, she initialed it at the top left.
Your Honor, at this time I ask that Defense Exhibit B be put into evidence as Defense Exhibit 2.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
So entered.
Now, you stated previously in your testimony that you studied this document extensively. So what, if anything, did you notice about it?
Well, her consumption of licorice tea increased throughout the week leading to her death, and on March 19th was the first time that she had strongly brewed tea throughout the day.
And in your expert opinion, is this a coincidence?
Well, no, I don't think so. For example, in 2004, a woman was hospitalized with hypokalemia, which is a low potassium level, and she suffered from high blood pressure and muscle failure due to her consumption of 200 grams of licorice candy a day. It's clear to me that with large amounts of licorice in the system, it's very detrimental to oneself.
And why would a lower potassium level be so dangerous in Mrs. Liverson's case?
Well, potassium and digoxin compete with each other for binding to the ATP pump, which controls the flow of sodium ions and potassium ions. With a low potassium level, digoxin is absorbed more by the body, which causes more stress to the heart and increases the risk of atrial fibrillation.
Now, doctor, in your expert opinion, what was the cause of Mrs. N.K. Liverson's atrial fibrillation?
Well, Mrs. Liberson must have taken her regular dose of digoxin medicine because of her consumption of the tea. It caused her potassium levels to be too low, which then caused her regular medication to prove fatal.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Isn't it true that you're paid to testify here today?
That is true.
You state that it is possible that Ms. Liberson's potassium deficiency was caused by chronic ingestion of licorice tea, correct?
That is correct.
Possible meaning that could have happened, we're not sure about.
Yes,
You're a PhD, right? Not an MD?
that is correct.
You work in an office, not a hospital, right?
That is correct.
So you've never worked with a patient before?
No, I have not.
Never had direct contact with anyone sick?
No, I haven't.
Do you know what an autopsy is?
Yes, I did.
Are you familiar with the fact that the medical examiner was performed over 25 years ago?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Response?
No, it's much about just read that.
Then we'll move on and the objection is sustained.
Did you perform the autopsy on Ms. Liberson?
No, I did not.
Did you assist in the autopsy at all?
No, I did not.
Did you look at her body firsthand?
No, I did not.
Have you ever met the victim?
No.
Have you ever examined her while she was alive?
Objection, Your Honor. I don't understand the relevance of this line of questioning.
Response?
I'm just trying to establish that Ms. Renarto has no experience with the victim. She hasn't she has no experience in that area of like she's never had like any contact with the victim at all. She's never met her. So
Response?
I don't see if that's pertinent to the case right now.
Goes to credibility, so your objection is overruled.
did you ever examine her as a patient?
No, I did not.
Have you ever tested for digoxin?
Not
Did
personally.
you ever assist in testing for digoxin?
No, I have not.
You haven't had any digoxin cases to study directly to you, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Which means you're giving us your expert testimony on a substance you have no experience with, correct?
That is correct.
So you have no first-hand experience in autopsies or testing for digoxin.
That is correct.
In your affidavit, you state that excessive consumption of licorice can be harmful to the liver and increase potassium levels, correct?
That is correct.
But there aren't any studies showing a correlation between the amounts of potassium levels, correct?
That is correct.
You state that it's possible that a substantial amount of licorice and an ordinary dose of digoxin is a possible explanation for Ms. Liberson's death, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So you're telling us that the victim could have died due to licorice tea?
That is correct.
That's your expert opinion?
Yes.
You also state that it's possible. You also state that it's possible, meaning that that could have happened. We're not 100% sure.
Yes.
Okay. So it's possible that there could have been another reason for Ms. Liberson's death, correct?
Possibly.
It took you up to 8 hours to review the autopsy report, Ms. Kraft's affidavit, and Dr. Lada's affidavit. the T journal and relevant medical literature of licorice and its properties, correct?
Yes.
So you're saying 8 hours is a sufficient amount of time to review all that information?
Absolutely.
You were able to determine the cause of death in 8 hours?
Yes.
You're telling us that you learned more about this case in 8 hours than someone who performed the autopsy on the victim?
Yes.
You expect us to believe your expert testimony over that of the doctor who's actually performed the actual autopsy on the victim?
Yes.
So you're saying you want us to believe that your expert testimony is more valid than that of the doctor's?
Yes.
No more further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
The witness may step down. Yes, please. Thank you. Does the defense have any further witnesses?
No, Your Honor. The defense rests.
Yeah, you want to take a second?
Sure.
Take a
Let's
2-minute
take a
recess.
brief recess.
Just a 2-minute recess before the closings.
Is the prosecution ready to proceed with closing statements?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. We gathered here today so that you could hear about the malicious killing of beloved Dana K. Larson, a sweet, widowed woman whose life was taken from her at the age of 90, all because of one man's greed. You have heard today from both the prosecution and the defense. As you heard, the argument of the defense falls short due to several holes in their case. And because of this, there should be no doubt in your mind that Paul Breedy killed his great aunt. In order for someone to commit a murder, they must have the means, the motive, and the opportunity to do so. As you learned today, no other than Paul Breedy had all three. The defense would like you to believe that Ms. Laverson is no longer here today because of her age, her health, and even something as foolish as licorice tea. But the facts that have been laid out before you today do not point in that direction. The defense discussed a multitude of possibilities today, but the one they failed to mention is the one that we should truly be considering: greed. Greed is an excessive desire for more than one needs or deserves. In this case, Paul Breedy had greed when it came to wealth. His desire for money was so intense that it led him to kill his very own great aunt. In this case, we are dealing with first-degree murder, which is the unlawful killing of another with malice aforethought, as defined by Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 265, Section 1. 3 witnesses have been brought to you by the prosecution. You heard from Detective Arthur Holloway, the lead detective in this case. He has given his opinion based on years of knowledge solving over 140 murder cases. Detective Holloway explained that after an extensive investigation, he concluded that Paul Breedy was the only suspect. He had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to carry out this heinous crime. Detective Holloway explained before you today that the defendant's fingerprints were found on victim's pill box, which he had no business in touching due to the fact that the pills had been neatly and properly stored by Ms. Laverson's caring LPN, Colin Loisel. You also heard from Detective Holloway that upon searching the defendant's home, he found a book, the Schleicher Chronicles, suspiciously hidden behind the defendant's bookshelf. This book laid out precise instructions on how to carry out a murder, such as the one at hand. The prosecution also brought you Dr. Sebastian Latta. As an expert, he informed the court that after performing an autopsy and running several extensive tests, he concluded that the cause of Ms. Laverson's death was atrial fibrillation brought on by high digoxin levels and low potassium levels. Dr. Latta concluded that the only way this could have happened was by Ms. Laverson consuming pills that had been tampered with. She had taken too many doses of digoxin without proper potassium supplementation. And also, Colin Loisel was brought to you by the prosecution. Mr. Colin Loisel was Ms. Laverson's caring personal nurse. Even though the two were in a professional relationship, they developed a relationship almost like a mother and son. You heard him testify today about how devastated he is that she is gone. He explained to the court that he knew the defendant was greedy and only after Ms. Laverson's wealth. He only became interested in Ms. Laverson, and his visits only became regular after he realized there was money at stake. You learned today that Ms. Laverson was incredibly wealthy, and if she were to die, she'd be leaving a lot of money behind. Her net worth was estimated to be around $25 million. You also learned today that she had plans to update her will at the end of March. Had this new will been taken into effect, the defendant would have stood to lost $4 million. Mr. Breedy knew that if he wanted to keep his original share of his great aunt's money, he would have to act fast and kill Ms. Laverson before the end of March to ensure that none of his money would be lost. Greed truly did get the best of Mr. Paul Breedy. And also, the defense brought you 3 witnesses today. You heard from Ms. Gladys Kravitz. This innocent woman was badgered with questions before you in an attempt to try to shift the blame away from the defendant. The defense attempted to create reasonable doubt by claiming that the tea provided by Ms. Liberson was the cause for Ms. Liberson's lowered potassium levels. But as you heard from Ms. Kravitz, the trained and accomplished herbalist, this tea was not harmful. Erica Venorto was also brought to you by the defense. She claimed that she ran accurate and precise tests, but she never dealt with anything like the case at hand. She is not a medical doctor. She did not come in direct contact with the victim's body. She based all of her knowledge off a mere 8 hours of research. And finally, you heard from the defendant himself, Mr. Paul Breedy. He claimed he and his great aunt had an indescribable bond, but as anyone can see, it was all an act in an attempt to get close to her money. It is no coincidence that not long after the defendant spent the weekend completely alone with Ms. Liberson, with full access to her home, belongings, and pills, that she died a mysterious death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution has shown you that the defendant had the means to carry out this crime. He understood the process that needed to be carried out because of an instructional book that he had. We have also shown you that he had the motive. The defendant was in a lot of debt. He had $4 million at stake that could have eliminated all of his problems and allowed him to be work-free for the rest of his life. In your honor, he clearly had a large window of opportunity due to the fact that he spent a private weekend alone with Ms. Liberson just 2 weeks prior to her death. Today, the prosecution had a job, and that job was to prove, as stated in Commonwealth v. Rhodes, that the defendant's act is cause, which in the natural and continuous sequence produces the death, and without which the death would not have occurred. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at this point, there should be no doubt in your mind that the death of Dana K. Liberson was caused by anything other than the malicious acts of Paul Breedy. Greed can truly get the best of people, and this is what happened to Paul Breedy. Thank you.
Closing argument for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the case presented to you today is particularly grim, as the unfortunate and untimely death of Mrs. Dana K. Liberson has left a void in the lives of her beloved friends and family. But while Mrs. Liberson's death is particularly morbid, it is just as inconclusive as it is heartbreaking, because the murderer will not be found today. My client, Paul Breedy, could not have possibly committed this crime because the prosecution has failed to meet the burden of proof placed upon it. The burden of proof lies with the prosecution, and this means that in a criminal case, the prosecution must prove a defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, as defined by Commonwealth v. Pinckney. Reasonable doubt is a term that is used often, but one that is never truly easy to define. Having reasonable doubt, as defined by Commonwealth v. Webster, is that state of the case in which after comparison and consideration of all the evidence leaves the mind of the jurors in that state in which they cannot say they feel an abiding conviction to a moral certainty of the truth of the charge. And such is the case here, as there are numerous instances of reasonable doubt laced throughout this entire case. For the prosecution to prove Paul Breedy guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, they must be able to prove 3 elements. The first is that Paul Breedy committed unlawful killing. The second is that he committed it with malice. And the third is that he committed it with deliberate premeditation. For Paul Breedy to have committed unlawful killing, his actions must have directly contributed to the death of his great aunt, and he must have taken out these actions without an excuse. The prosecution will try to lead you to believe that Paul Breedy tampered with his aunt's medication, and this is what led to her subsequent atrial fibrillation. But this is not the case. Yes, Paul Breedy had access to the house and the pills, and yes, his fingerprints were on it. But the only time Paul Breedy had this access is when he was visiting his great aunt, and at those times he was too occupied with spending time with her and taking care of her. In addition, there's a 2-week span from the time of Paul Breedy's last visit, the weekend of March 4th, and the time of Mrs. Liberson's death. Consider that the pillbox is set up in a month-long span. That is a 2-week period in which tampered medication, assuming Breedy had taken out his actions on that weekend, would have been left in the pillbox. Surely an ample amount of time for a qualified LPN like Nurse Colin Lozelle to have noticed. Breedy could not have tampered with the medicine, not without Nurse Lozelle noticing at least. In addition, the prosecution has not been able to prove malice. Paul Breedy had no reason to kill his aunt, and it's absurd to think he's being charged with this in the first place. They had a very close-knit relationship, and Liberson had always supported Paul Breedy, something he made sure to reciprocate throughout their lives. The prosecution will try to lead you to believe that Paul Breedy was furious at the fact that Liberson had changed his will. But this is not the case. In fact, you had heard Paul Breedy testify today to the fact that he was actually happy that Nurse Lozelle was getting a chunk of the will, and that he had very much deserved it. Lastly, the prosecution has not been able to prove deliberate premeditation. They will try to lead you to believe that Paul Breedy's master plan was devised by reading the Schlenker Chronicles. This is not true. You have heard Paul Breedy testify to the fact that he had never even read the book, and thus he had no idea how it ended. So there was no basis for this claim. In addition to the prosecution not even matched even one of the three elements, there are numerous instances of reasonable doubt laced throughout this case. You have heard from Dr. Erica Vernort on how the tests used to determine digoxin levels are inaccurate to the point where the science is out of date. You have also heard from the good Dr. Vernort on her licorice tea theory and how Liberson's religious consumption of the beverage could have very well been her downfall. Licorice contains glycerine, a substance which decreases the kidney's retention of potassium. Liberson's rampant consumption of the beverage, especially the week leading up to her death, very well could have been the cause of her downfall. You've also heard from Dr. Lott on how very likely it was that Liberson's deteriorating health, including her severe cataracts and dementia, could have been the cause of her death.
National Honor Society meeting is today at 2:30 in Mr. Marx's room.
You've also heard from Paul Breedy and how he coveted his relationship with his great aunt. Breedy was by far Liberson's favorite nephew, and he had always made sure to stand by his side. Paul Breedy's an average guy. He holds down a job as a day trader, he's an avid reader, and he had loved to spend time with his great aunt. Certainly not the type to fit the mold of cold-blooded killer. But some of his relatives would, especially COCAP. In fact, you have heard from multiple witnesses on how COCAP seemed to loathe every single thing Liberson ever did, and was particularly livid at the fact that Liberson had changed the will. You have also heard from Gladys Kravitz, Liberson's neighbor, and how COCAP seemed to...
Also, there's an Asian culture meeting in Miss Fong's room in D434.
And how COCAP seemed to always go off about what Liberson was doing. You have also heard from Kravitz on how Paul Breedy was the only one who stood up for his aunt and often berated his cousins for not showing the same respect. In addition to these numerous loose ends, there are numerous deficiencies in the prosecution's case as well. Dr. Latta had used inaccurate and out-of-date testing methods. What about Nurse Colin Lozelle? If anything, he had more opportunity and more access than either Paul Breedy or COCAP. He had complete and total access to the house and pillbox, and he lived with Liberson, so he was with her 24/7. Nurse Lozelle could have changed whatever he wanted about the pills, whenever he wanted, and only he himself would have noticed even the slightest discrepancies. But why would he do it? He'd already gotten a chunk of the will. Maybe he wanted more. Maybe he had become more entitled over the years. Whatever the reason, we may never know thanks to an underwhelming investigation conducted by Detective Arthur Holloway. Lack of diligent police investigation, as defined by Commonwealth v. Finney, states, a defendant has the right to base their defense on the failure of police to adequately investigate a murder in order to raise reasonable doubt as to their guilt. Holloway had Paul Breedy, COCAP, and Nurse Lozelle as suspects, yet he only chose to dig deeper into Paul Breedy. In addition, Holloway's entire case, the prosecution's entire case, hinges on the Schlenker Chronicles, a book to which Paul Breedy has testified to never even reading. Let's assume for a second Paul Breedy had read the book. It is a New York Times bestseller. It is owned by thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Detective Holloway himself had even read the book. In addition, the prosecution has not been able to prove Paul Breedy ever committed the acts described in the book, assuming he'd be able to emulate something out of a novel. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Paul Breedy could not have possibly committed this crime. The prosecution has not been able to match even one of the three elements, and there are numerous instances of reasonable doubt laced throughout this case, so they have not been able to meet the burden of proof placed upon them. Paul Breedy cherished his great aunt, and she meant so much more to him alive than she ever would dead. Thank you.
Alright, at this time we're going to do jury instructions and then the jury will deliberate. Thank
This
you
is
all.
how we're going to do it. You, sir, Mr. Alpiano, you are the jury foreman. You've just been appointed, okay? We're actually going to step out just for 2 minutes for you to deliberate. We're almost done. This is what you're going to decide. If you feel, based on all the evidence, that Paul Breedy committed an unlawful killing of Mrs. Liberson with malice aforethought, you need to find him guilty. What that means is he killed her, he intended to kill her, and he planned it out in advance. Okay? If you find that he killed her, intended to kill her, and planned it out in advance, you find him guilty. If you do not find that, if you find that there's sufficient reasonable doubt to say that he didn't do those things, then you must find him not guilty. There are no lesser included offenses in this case. It's either first-degree murder or nothing. Is this clear? All right. Why don't we just stand up for a second? Hold on. All rise. While the jury's excused. Oh, let's walk out the back just for a second. seated until the jury returns. All rise for the jury. Just before we hear from the jury, in criminal cases in Massachusetts and in the United States, the jury needs to be unanimous, which means everyone needs to agree on the verdict. And when you deliberate for 4.5 minutes, it's kind of difficult to get that, which is why some of the deliberations can go on for days and days. With that said, Mr. Foreman, would you like to tell the group what you've come up with? Is Paul Brady guilty of killing Dana K. Liverson in first-degree murder?
We didn't come to a decision.
They have not come to a decision. So what we're going to do to get a feel of how close we were is we're going to poll the jury. Juror number 1, guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Juror number 2,
Guilty.
juror number 3.
Guilty.
All right. Juror number 4.
Not guilty.
Juror number 5.
Not guilty.
Juror number 6.
Not guilty.
Juror number 7.
Not guilty.
Juror number 8.
Guilty.
Juror number 9.
Guilty.
Juror number 10.
Guilty.
Juror number 11.
Guilty.
Juror number 12.
Guilty.
Juror number 13.
Guilty.
And juror number 14.
Guilty.
There were 8 for guilty and 6 for not guilty.
8 for guilty, 6 for not guilty. I guess he's guilty.
You are guilty. It's over.
I was almost a 50-50 split.
All right, hold on one more second. We got literally 2 seconds. The judge just wants to say one quick thing, and then we're out of here. Stop. Everyone sit down just for 1 more second. Thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it.
I just have a few brief comments. I'll keep them short because I know that the school day's over and everyone's kind of itching to get out of here. First of all, you guys all did a great job. I was very impressed specifically with the structures that you both sides had on the cross-examinations and the direct examinations. You did a really good job laying that foundation and really making your points very clear. What I would like to see more of, though, especially at the beginning of the trial, is explanations about who these people are and what these scientific terms are. There were a lot of names thrown at me, and I'm pretty sure that the defendant's name is Greedy, and I'm not quite sure of anyone else. So just because from someone hearing it for the first time, you really have to slow down and repeat those names a few times, explaining who they are.
There is a DSAC meeting in room B337 immediately, right now. DSAC meeting in room B337 right now. Thank you.
And anytime you can say something like the defendant or something else like that that tells us who the person is without actually saying the name, that also helps to clarify. I made a few comments about presentation. I think that in mock trial, what's often overlooked is how you present it, because you work really hard at getting to know the facts and knowing the arguments and knowing the case, but sometimes how you present it to the jury gets overlooked. This side did a little more than this side, but asking the judge, may I proceed, before starting with your questioning is it's just good form. It's also nice when you're talking to the witness, whether it's on direct examination or on cross-examination, good morning, good afternoon. You don't have to ask them how their day was or get chatty about it, but just acknowledging that they're a person will make you more likable to the jury. And ultimately, the jury does need to like you because they're going to rule on whether they believe you or whether they believe the other side. You have the podium, which is a great resource for holding your notes, but when you lean on it, it makes you look like you're uncertain and you don't know what you're talking about. And then all of the little things that happen behind the podium, the crossing of the legs, the leaning back and forth, the fidgeting with your clothes, that you think we don't see, we actually do. So it's really important just to make sure that you're standing confidently, because then the jury and the judge will be more likely to believe and trust what you have to say, because you'll feel more confident. Everyone did a great job not saying or using any other types of fillers. I was very impressed by that because it's a very easy habit to fall back into. And everyone also did a really good job of eye contact with the judge, but don't forget about the jury here because they're the ones who actually matter. You also want to make sure that you are all louder and slower. It's really important. You sound, when you hear yourself in your head, you think you're going at an appropriate pace, but especially for someone who's never heard the case before, you can always slow down. If you start thinking in your head, oh my gosh, am I going too slowly? Then you're probably almost slow enough. And I can't emphasize that enough. The witnesses did a really good job with their pacing and their volume. I think that the attorneys on both sides could really focus on sounding and louder and slowing down. Because I know the focus has to be on the witness, but we still have to be able to hear your questions and understand your questions in order to put what the witness has to say back into context. A tip for cross-examination that I think both sides struggled with a little bit, never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Because if you don't know the answer, the witness can get away with whatever they want, and you don't really have a way to go back on that and to fix that mistake. So ask a question you know the answer to, and that way if you don't get the answer that you want, you can impeach them, and it's as easy as that. And if you know that, then you'll feel better about it, and you won't have to let the witness get away with so much. I heard a little bit of people signposting. I heard, let's talk about this, let's talk about that, which I thought was really good. And you can make that into a whole sentence, because there's a lot going on, and everyone's switching points really quickly, especially on cross-examination. So if you say something like, I'd like to speak with you now about what happened on this particular day. It just puts your set of questions into context, and it helps make give everything a little more sense. It catches the jury's attention because it's a normal sounding tone, and they all know where you're going with it. But overall, I think everyone did a great job. I have more specific comments that I'm going to give to your teacher. Great job, everyone.
Very good. Thank you to you, by the way, for the judge.